Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lethal Intervention podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnai ka mihi ki te mana whenua o Aotearoa, and we acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Gungaloo country in Queensland. And before we dive into our conversation today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community.
The Lethal Intervention is an Australasian educational and advocacy platform dedicated to raising awareness about the current climate and health crisis.
And on this podcast, we invite guests to chat about topics that will inspire you to take action to improve your own health and the health of the planet.
So please subscribe to and share this podcast and visit our website for full show notes.
And don't forget to buy us a coffee if you'd like to support our work.
Our aim of this podcast has always been, and continues to be, conversations on current health and climate challenges that are relevant to our region here in Australasia, and with guests that are local to our region, most of the time. So when we make exceptions, they're always for a good reason, and on this episode, it is certainly a good one. Plus, Emma, I don't believe we have ever had an Olympic medalist on the show either.
Yeah, that's right, Ben. Today's the first. So our guest today is an Olympic medalist, an activist, a public speaker, podcast host, and the founder and executive director of the not-profit Switch4Good. I'm not sure when she finds the time to sleep, honestly. A lot of our audience will know her from documentaries like Personal Gold or The Game Changers, and she now devotes her time to spreading the message about the numerous benefits of plant-based eating. We are, of course, talking about the phenomenal Dotsie Bausch. Dotsie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's amazing to be here. I've raced in both New Zealand and Australia, and they are my favorite countries on planet Earth to race my bike and visit. So I miss being there, and it's awesome to see you guys. You guys are there.
Now, Dotsie, where are you? Because we know you're a day behind. We offered to give you the lotto numbers because we're ahead of you, but
still waiting.
Where are you joining us from?
I live in Southern California, so like about an hour south of Los Angeles.
Fantastic. So, like we do with all our guests, we love a good backstory to our guests, and as Emma's indicated, this is going to be half the podcast, is your life story, I'm sure. But tell us about your background, who you are, and your personal journey in terms of your health journey, and of course, your phenomenal career in cycling.
Oh, that is a broad, open-ended question, and I'm going to try and be succinct, right? If anybody asks you your whole life, okay, all right, time me because I like to race. So, okay. I grew up in Kentucky, which is like southern Midwestern. You know, everybody from the Midwest thinks it's the South, and everybody from the South thinks it's the Midwest here in the U.S. But I think it's the South, and I grew up on Southern cooking. I grew up on barbecue and brisket and fried chicken, and potato salad, and there wasn't probably a meal for about 35 years of my life that there wasn't an animal on my plate. So that's just what we did. I grew up in the 80s, so we didn't really know very much at that point in time about really true nutrition, and what you put in your mouth matters for, every orifice of our being from head to toe, but, especially our hearts, right? And how they're going to continue to thrive. So I went to school on the East Coast and found myself in a deep depression, struggled with anorexia for about 5 years, in and out of inpatient and outpatient treatment centers. Anorexia came along with its best friend, a cocaine addiction. And I kind of lost almost 6 years of my life to that, and almost lost my life. I had a awakening after a second suicide attempt. I'll call it awakening, a moment in time where I thought this is definitely going to go the wrong way if I don't just stop and at least try. And my family was my impetus, my motivation to try to get better. So long story short, went through multiple types of treatments, and none of them were working. I had moved out to Southern California by that time, basically for the sunshine, because I had been on a project out there in the middle of January, which for us is the dead of winter, right? Not for you guys. And it was like 75 and sunny the entire 3 weeks. And I was like, is this normal? And everybody's like, yeah, it's always like this. And I said, okay, this is where I belong, because I just thrive in the sunshine. And so moved out to Southern Cal and found a therapist that I really connected with. I'm in the midst of writing a prescriptive memoir, and a lot of her techniques are in the book that we used. But as we traversed my healing journey, which was a couple years long, towards the end of that journey, she's the one that suggested that I pick up an activity or a sport or an exercise that would be healthy for me, because she knew I wanted to be able to move my healthy body now, my now healthy body, in a healthy way again, which I hadn't been able to do for a really long time. And I was always very active as a kid, and I grew up in competitive horseback riding. So like I had that competitive spirit and that desire just to move, right? Whether it's a 5K or 10K run or whatever it might be. And that's when I chose the bicycle. I was 26 at the time, and I said, hey, maybe I get a bike. Like I've ridden a bike when I was like 10, a banana seat bike with the orange flag and around my neighborhood in Kentucky, but I hadn't been on a bike since. And it just sounded, I don't know, at the time, I just thought, gosh, I'm living out here where it's beautiful all the time and the sun is shining, and it just will feel free, I think, to ride a bike down Pacific Coast Highway. And 14 years later, landed on the Olympic podium, and 2 years before the Olympics went completely vegan. And so did it on plants, and I'm the oldest in history to even go to the Olympics in my discipline on plants, but oldest in general, whatever you eat. But yeah, so that was a extraordinary 24-month journey of trying to figure out what to eat after having eaten an animal at every single meal for my entire life. But as y'all know, it's pretty easy to figure out. Lentils are a staple. They always will be. And lentils fueled me to the Olympic podium. I say that all the time, lentils and sweet potatoes.
I think that's our tagline right there, but
Lentils and sweet potato. There we go. So that's quite phenomenal, because like you say, you only picked up the bike seriously, that is, at the age of 26. And by the time you got to the Olympic, with all due respect, you were old by Olympic standard, by competitive standard. But that's phenomenal though, because it also goes to show it's not just your ability to perform, but the fact that you I always talk when I coach my athletes, it's all about longevity in the sport. You can aim goals and you can do everything you need to do to get to a particular goal, but you can also break yourself. You can destroy yourself. And a lot of athletes at elite level can do that. And you reach the age of 30 and that's retirement, because your body has had enough. But the fact that you could do it at such a later stage of your life just goes to show the impact of what you had undertaken in terms of your diet and everything else to be able to compete, and not just compete. You stepped on that podium. That's significant.
And just to piggyback on that also, I mean, you had some pretty formidable health challenges that you overcame along the way as well. So that just kind of makes it even more phenomenal.
Yeah, well, thank you. I will say the body was old, and the mind was getting old. But there's something about being old, right? When 40's not old, generally speaking, right? People listening to this that are my age now, I was like, come on. But I had such a unique perspective compared to the 17-year-olds that were there at the Olympics. And I had lived a couple of lifetimes already. I'd had a couple different careers. And so I was hyper aware of the opportunity that was in front of me. And it really allowed me to sink into the experience and the gift that is being able to compete at the Olympic Games. And that was because I was a mature athlete, right? That I think when you're 20, you're like, oh, I'm going to be here like 5 more times, So, and I knew that I wasn't going to be, and I had this great respect and appreciation for just even getting to be there, and that flowed through the whole couple of weeks and through the competition. It just my sports psychologist and I called it my 3 minutes of opportunity, because our event is around 3 minutes. And it was such a unique and wonderful opportunity. And that's how I looked at it.
And it was a pretty interesting time to be involved in cycling at that point as well, wasn't it, with the whole doping controversy around it? So that just adds another layer of stress and complexity to it.
Yeah, it did. It was especially stressful, I think, for the US women, for the road, the track, the mountain bikers, because we found out exactly 2 weeks before we were going to leave for London. We were training in Mallorca, Spain for the 4 months before. And I remember being at the track, and I remember our coach hanging up the phone, and he just looked white. And he had just found out that the entire men's road team, Van de Velde, Armstrong, George Hincapie, the whole crew, had been banned from the Olympic Games. And so in a single moment, it was as if all of the pressure of USA Cycling was placed on the women. And we delivered, because we won medals on the tracks, silver, and the road, they one of the women won gold, a mountain biker won bronze from USA. So it was, and I think we took the pressure well, but it was a really strange feeling to realize that half our teammates were not going to be there. They were the best in the world at that time. Well, now we know why, but anyway, yeah.
And to our listeners, just in case, because not everyone's, across sport and perhaps track cycling in particular, but Dotsie was certainly not a one-hit wonder. We're talking about her amazing silver Olympic medal, but 8 US national championships titles, 2 Pan American gold medals, a world record. So this was a career. This wasn't a one-off event that people are listening thinking, oh, yep, okay, so, in the 10 years or whatever. This was a career. This was a significant career. So we're making sure we're not talking about one event. This was a career that you had some phenomenal successes and outcomes that led to that amazing outcome with the Olympics. So we do need to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, they're going to think cycling's like an easy sport or something if we just act like it was quite the contrary. Yeah, no, it was a whole journey. It was a whole adventure, a whole journey, and starting out on a pretty big team very, very early in my career, which made me almost want to quit every single minute of every single day, because I was way in over my head with so many of the athletes that had started cycling at 10. Instead of 26. So I was really at a disadvantage in the beginning, and I felt it and I knew it. And, but I was so in love with the sport and just the curiosity of seeing how it might unfold, and if I could, make it a living, and if I could possibly make it to some big races, that I just kept pushing. And finally, there started to be some breakthroughs. So just for the love of it, really.
Now, if you're not into cycling and if you're not into watching the Olympic Games, a lot of people would have still come across you in a documentary, excuse the pun, that was game-changing, the Netflix documentary, The Game Changers. We do need to touch on that, because what we'd love to know is the whole journey of how you got involved. We know it was a process of, it was 3-4 years of filming, and then it was put out there in terms of this amazing documentaries coming out. It took another 2-3 years to be released. It was such a long process. But tell us about your involvement with that, and did you get to meet some of the other featured athletes? I know a lot of athletes got cut out from the eventual final production. You weren't, obviously. Tell us about that whole experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely handed to the producers and the director, Louis Ficios, for just, staying tough and standing strong and pushing through to really make it truly what it was there at the end, which was an extraordinary story they told. You need the really rich, interesting personal stories, but you also need the evidence and the science and the doctors and to be able to, for someone to say, yes, I think this is maybe something I can try, because it's still, kind of niche, right? Oh my God, you're just going to eat plants? That's insane. How aren't you going to shrivel up? So I think they did a really incredible job of meshing the two. But as you mentioned in the intro, I had been a part of a documentary called Personal Gold, where filmmakers followed my team about a year out from the Olympic Games, a little less than. And so because of that, we had a ton of footage. So, because you can't recreate. I mean, as you know from the film, there's a lot of Olympic Games footage in there, and a lot of the training, and it was real training for the Olympics. And I hadn't met the Game Changers people yet, so a lot of that training footage came from the wonderful people that produced Personal Gold and gave it to them to use. So, but it was a lengthy interview process too. We just, because we must have interviewed for 4 hours, and there's like 4 minutes in the film or less than. But that was that was a wonderful experience. Louis did the interviewing, and as you all know, has an Academy Award from The Cove. If your listeners haven't watched The Cove, it's phenomenal. His second film was Racing Extinction, which is my favorite film he's made. And so he's such a magnificent storyteller and so easy to talk to. So that whole process with him was really just kind of a delight and a joy. And then, as you mentioned, it was the longest journey ever before it premiered at Sundance Film Festival. But we had been going to screenings, right? Because you go to tons of screenings to see how the audience is going to react. And a lot of times the athletes and the doctors would be up on the stage to answer questions so that we knew what people were curious about, what we hadn't answered in the film. And we did that for a good year before Sundance and a good year after. So I got to meet all the athletes in the film multiple times over, and some of them are my good friends to this day, and some of the behind the scenes folks, the scientists that worked on the film. It's just a great crew all the way around. So, and now, I mean, I feel like every other day I'm introduced to, or I see a new, powerful, incredible, wildly successful athlete that's vegan, from all different sports. And I think the power sports are the ones that really trip people out, like the weightlifters and the bodybuilders, and that it's just like, how do you do that? And at the end of the day, protein's protein, right? It doesn't have to come from your dead friend. So it's just so inspiring to see now. 12 years ago when I first did it, I mean, I didn't even know who to ask any questions. I didn't know. Social media wasn't as big back then. I don't think there was Instagram. I think there was Facebook, but now, we just all have access, right? And so I love when I get emails from athletes up and coming, like, I think I'm going to do this, whatever they want to know. It's just like, oh yeah, it's working. It's like, people are getting it. It's really exciting.
Yep. Yeah. I always, as a dietitian, you always kind of notice a little spike in interest after these kinds of documentaries come out. But once the Game Changers came out, very uniquely, a lot of interest from men. So I think they really achieved what they set out to do there, which was phenomenal. But just taking it back a step, I'm very interested to hear, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were already vegetarian at the time when you made that switch for good and went plant-based, but as you said, it wasn't a big thing back then. So how did your team react? What was the response there?
I was vegetarian for 2 months, and then I kind of found out what was going on behind closed doors, in succession. You start to uncover, and then you're like, oh my God, what the hell? And then you dig deeper and you're like, oh my God. So it took a while to really get down to the animal products, right? Because everybody thinks, oh, the sweet cows and the grass grazing in the beautiful field, and we just do a little milk from them and it's all fine. But then, now what I fight every day for is the end of the dairy industry. So, I've learned a lot since then, but it took a while to understand eggs and dairy and, butter, cheese, yogurt, that kind of thing. But you know what? I got to say, my teammates were awesome. First of all, I didn't advertise it. I didn't know I came in through the ethics route because I just found out, like I said, what goes on behind closed doors. And I'm sure with this podcast, your listeners know what goes on behind closed doors, because I'm sure you've talked about it in 100 episodes. So it was just this soul shift thing for me where it was like, okay, I am now going to be eating completely different because I'm not going to be a party to that. I can't even sleep at night if I were to do that. And as I mentioned before, my whole life I was eating quite a bit of animals. And so it wasn't something from day one that I advertised, because I kind of was like, okay, am I going to figure this out? Is it, am I going to die? Am I going to, I had all of the questions that everyone has at the beginning of it. Is this possible? And I remember thinking to myself a couple weeks in, like, okay, if I could just stay the same. Like, I just kept going, can I just stay the same? Like, not, because I didn't think I was going to get better. I didn't think I was going to get stronger or faster or recover or repair was going to improve. I didn't think I was going to get stronger. I definitely didn't think I was going to get stronger. And so it was just like, please let me stay the same. Because at this point, I haven't made the Olympic team, right? I'm in the group of women that may make the Olympic team. So I have quite a bit of ways to go. So I just started making changes, and I just, I think my teammates kind of started noticing, and then I just said, yeah, I'm not going to do so much of the animal thing. Now they know everything. But at that part, I was like, I don't really need to rock them off their game. So then after Olympics, I sent them everything, and I was like, here's what, and they're like, oh my God. One of them is quasi-vegan, actually. But it was just kind of, we were all a bit older. They were about 10 years my junior, but that's still 10 years older than like the Aussies and the Brits that we were competing against. So we kind of just all had our own jam, right? We were mature enough. We were all married. We lived with our husbands. We weren't living at the training center. And so we just had a lot of respect for each other. We all had a fair amount of confidence in our training, and they trusted me. So it wasn't like this, like, oh my God. I had a few coaches that were like, well, that's the end of that. You've just ruined your chances. And I was like, well, we'll see. But my teammates were awesome. They really, really were, So yeah, I appreciated that, because I think it would have, it would have probably done a number on me if they were like, don't do this. Yeah.
Well, they're supportive until the point that maybe you did let them down, and then they wouldn't have been. So luckily you came through with the
well, no,
the
that's
result.
true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. They're like, this is working and you need to slow down, because you're like, they started being like, what are you on? And I'm like, lentils and sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
So milk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we've started talking about Switch4Good. So let's go there. What is Switch4Good? What is it all about? How did it all start? Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, well, it started as really just I think can I cuss on this podcast? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Not made for kids.
This is not a children's podcast. It really, honestly, it started as a big fuck you to the United States Olympic Committee, and that's going to sound strong because they do a wonderful job. However, you guys may know this, New Zealand and the United States are the only countries in the world who are not government funded for their Olympic team. So they have to get private funders, right? They have to get corporations. And that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, nobody thinks that. Everybody thinks that the Olympic teams are funded of the government. They are in every other country in the world. So it makes the teams have to go after gigantic corporate sponsorship. So for the U.S. team, it's the dairy industry, the marketing arm of the dairy industry. It has been for 10 years. I don't think they're continuing because they've stopped the commercials on the Olympic Games. So I like to say partly that's because of us. So it started because I was, as we've already talked about, retired right after London, had gone plant-based 2 years before, and knew the evidence, right? I not only knew the evidence, I knew the widespread cruelty. I knew the monopoly they had on the American people. I knew the lies they were telling. I knew how in bed they were in with the government. I just knew all of it. And I saw teammates of color, being made sick by it immediately due to lactose intolerance or even a dairy allergy. And so I kind of came out swinging, like, okay, this isn't fair. This isn't right. No one's saying anything. We're all just kind of like robots. And it was everywhere at the Olympic Training Center dairy. I mean, it was in the vending machines. We had a recovery bar inside the cafeteria that was like literally, I'm not even kidding. I'm sure has other options today, but back then it was all dairy and some eggs. So it was whey protein and cottage cheese and yogurt and milk. And it was just lactation from a cow on a bar. And that was like, this is the real premium way that athletes are going to recover and repair and win medals. I mean, that was the lie we were sold. And so in 2018, which was, some years after I retired, I had a consulting business in sports technology, and I'm watching the Olympic training or the trials for the 2018 Olympics on TV. And a dairy commercial comes on, and it uses it's a 30-second commercial, but it uses a world-class skier and her mom and their relationship, which is not lost on me or you, to sell the product of another mother who had her baby taken from her. And I was like, what the F? Like, this is, it just sent me right over the edge. I said in that moment to my husband, okay, that's enough. Like, somebody has got to say something. Somebody's got to tell the truth. This is crazy too. None of us are having dairy to win medals. Like, by that point, there had started to be conversations. I think people started realizing how inflammatory dairy was. Like, there started to be more information and more evidence on the internet. And so my husband just looked at me and he's like, pretty much think that's you, because you're the only one that's so pissed about this that I know. So what we did is I got together with a team of, wonderful funders, obviously, because it was expensive, and production team. And we put a commercial with 7 Olympians from 4 different countries on the closing ceremonies of that Olympic Games in 2018 on NBC. And it was just like, you can see it on YouTube. It was like, hey, this is not what we fuel ourselves with. This is a lie. This isn't, So that was the beginning of Switch4Good. And Switch4Good, the name came because we had to stick something on the final card of the commercial, right? You watch the 29 seconds and then you have to say something to people. So at the last minute, we're like, so make the Switch4Good, and then there we go. And then about a year later, we realized that it could be an organization and we could do a lot of good. And there wasn't an organization, out there that's focusing on, health and performance and food justice. That's a huge component of the work that we do. And there's so much in relation to dairy and food justice, or food injustice and food insecurity, I guess I should say. And so we started the organization in 2019, and we're still fighting today. And we've expanded. I mean, the beginning, it was a lot of culture change, behavior change, science, evidence, just really working with the public to make changes and to understand the deleterious effects and what they can eat instead. But we've grown in the last couple of years a lot, and we're quite active in, American governmental policy change. And, you can go to the website, see all that stuff. I don't want to bore you guys, but really doing some really interesting, cool work as far as, changing the disparity that's happening inside of the school systems for 51 million children every day, and what they're eating and drinking. And we're also fairly active in corporate policy change, because I think those are the 3 areas, public, corporations, and government. If you can work within those 3 confines, you can start to make some real change. So
absolutely, yep. I just want to take it one step back, because you mentioned that you came out swinging, and you definitely did with that appropriately timed PSA. Did you get much pushback from that? It certainly got a lot of people talking. So not a smooth kind of launch into the world, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah. Well, we did. So the dairy industry got it kicked off, actually. So yeah, and which was probably great, because then it really was a brouhaha in the mainstream media, right? Because before, it maybe wouldn't have necessarily. The mainstream media might have said, the dairy industry pays us a lot of dollars to advertise. We're not going to touch that. But it was supposed to air in 6 markets. It aired in 2 on the East Coast. It's supposed to go across the country, right? From East Coast to West Coast. And we were in Los Angeles, like having a huge party, like so excited, and it never showed up. So anyway, it was a bummer, but looking back, I think it was good, because it was a bit of a brouhaha. I mean, it was just basically the dairy industry calling NBC and saying, take that down. And they pay them God only knows how many $1 million a year. Yeah. And we hadn't even paid them $1 million. So they didn't budge. They didn't give us our money back. And we did take it to another network the next week during the Super Bowl. which is kind of big here for our American football.
Just a little bit.
So got a little bit more. Yeah, I know. It's like embarrassing. I'm like, it's like, really? That's our, anyway, I won't go into that. I'm a soccer fan. I'll just say that. Real football.
Well, in New Zealand, it's no secret that dairy is, can almost equate dairy equals our GDP. It's it's a significant industry. There's a recent documentary titled Milked, and we interviewed the filmmakers Amy Taylor and Chris Huriwai, and they certainly go into depth the impact of the dairy industry, and it's everything from environmental, land degradation, and so on, to the health impacts as well. But it did come up with some solutions as well in terms of alternatives we could be looking at and the way we could be doing things differently. But you mentioned this yourself as well, as a big component is the food system and social inequities and so on. Tell us a little bit more about that, because it's very easy to talk about environmental, it's easy to talk about ethical reasons, but the whole social inequity, social justice impacts, food inequalities and so on, that's really significant. It doesn't get enough coverage. We start saying that quite a lot now on the show. It doesn't get enough coverage. So we really want to, that needs to be spoken more of, because that might actually impact more people as well, in terms of taking action. So
Right. Thanks for bringing it up. And I'm a huge fan of the Milked film. We chatted with those guys right before it came out, because fun story, when you make a documentary, as we all probably can imagine, it's like, all hands on deck for, 3, 4, 5 years. And they did such a phenomenal job. It was getting ready to be released. And you realize, you need you need education on the website. Because when people, hopefully they watch this film and then it's like, holy crap, and you want to change. And so someone connected us, because that's all we do. So we connected with them. We're like, we got you. Like, here's all the evidence and whatever. It was really cool to just be able to be the teeniest part of, like, for people to hopefully make the switch and make the change. Because that film is so profound. It's like one of my favorite films ever. I just think they did such a fantastic job with it. So for people that haven't seen it, so good. But here, I'll speak to just dairy specifically, and I'm going to speak here in the States. It is different in Europe and other places, just because I don't know your government and our government. We have a lot of things in common with the Olympics and our governments, don't we? But the Kiwi government and the U.S. government are literally in bed with the dairy industry. They feed off each other every minute of every day. It's really quite horribly disgusting. And I think for a variety of different reasons, that we can certainly have a long conversation about the health impacts, the negative health impacts, and the animal impacts. But from a food justice standpoint, it sounds benign, I think, to a lot of people, but lactose intolerance is a really real situation, and it has a lot of real horrible side effects, like wheezing and stuffy nose and exacerbation of asthma symptoms and stomach cramps and bloating and diarrhea, and even constipation. It's through the whole body. And BIPOC folks are mostly lactose intolerant. It's about 80% of people of African descent. It's about 98% of people of Asian descent. Native American, about 80%, 80 to 83%. So it's because their bodies have not genetically mutated, like some of us Nordic white people who have been milking cows the longest. As we know, as athletes, our bodies are really smart, and it mutates as it needs to, depending on what you're serving up. So there are 51 million children inside American school systems. About 30 million of them are on subsidies, meaning breakfast and lunch at school may be the only meals they get a day. They may not get dinner when they go home. And so the only beverage that they have a choice of is cow's milk. Now they can have a water, but they also need to take a, nutritionally diverse choice. And so that's a cow's milk, and they're literally force fed. It is put on their tray. And so it's, 36% of Americans are lactose intolerant. I think it's higher and higher. Of course, the more variety of cultures that come into the country. And so we have a situation where most of the children in that program, in that WIC program or that breakfast and lunch program, are being made sick by cow's milk, and there is no alternative. They don't have a choice. And when you really look at the history and you look at the history of our country, we created the school lunch program we created the lunch program right after the war when there was a surplus of dairy. But then in 1954, and that's when schools were still segregated, obviously. But in 1954, we passed Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate schools, which, depending on where you were in the country, took like 10 years for it to actually happen, especially if it was in the South. And at no point during that period of time, and it should have definitely at least happened when now schools are desegregated, did anyone ask the question if this is a healthy substance for all children, not just white children? Nobody ever asked the question until a couple years ago when we went to the dietary guidelines and started fighting to say, you need an alternative, they need a choice. And so we were successfully, along with other organizations, got soy milk into the dietary guidelines as nutritionally equivalent. We know it's much, much better than cow's milk for humans. So now we're fighting to get it into the schools at the same rate of reimbursement as cow's milk, and to get rid of the milk note. We have this insane milk note, is just what we call it here. But that is where if a child doesn't want to take a cow's milk, they have to have a note from their doctor or parent saying why they can't have it. I mean, how is it we're still living that way? So that's just one example of dietary racism right there embedded in our very own government and our very own school lunch program. And it needs to change.
And what a profound effect that could have on a child's learning as well. I mean, anyone who's ever had a tummy ache even could attest to the fact how much it affects you. So if they're having dairy at breakfast to start their day off and then again at lunchtime, it may sound.
I'm glad
small,
you brought that up.
But huge effects, huge flow on effects.
Yeah. A Black physician, Dr. Milton Mills, who you guys have probably seen in a couple of different documentaries. He's our medical director on this issue. And those are his exact words. He said, how much do you want to bet that dairy is one of the main sources of the performance gap between Black kids and white kids? From his own mouth. It's like, right. Because if you, like you said, just what you said, if you're feeling that way, you can't concentrate.
So you're making huge, important strides, and it sounds like you're making really, really good progress. If we take a step outside the school system now, for anyone that might be listening and they want to find out more about this, the Switch4Good website is extremely comprehensive. You've got a lot of resources that people can utilize. Mm-hmm. But just personal words of advice for someone thinking about going dairy-free, or, potential favorite meals or substitute ingredients. Any tips or tricks from you?
Yeah, well, you're probably going to feel a million times better almost overnight, especially if you do have lactose intolerance, which so many people do. But even if you don't, it's such an inflammatory food for the human body that we get all the time people that are just, it's like their lives have changed because they feel so much better. And it is the one animal product that will change your energy and how you feel on a daily basis more than any other. Like, you don't get people that come to you and say, oh my gosh, I dropped turkey last week and I feel so much better. It doesn't happen that fast, right? Like, over time, you're going to be doing wonders for your arteries and your heart and your energy, but it's not, but dairy's like, it's so intense, the feeling that people have on it. Just so inflamed, so lethargic, itchy skin conditions, psoriasis and eczema. Almost every single person I've ever talked to that has ditched dairy and had a skin condition, it's gone. Now, that's not like, that's not scientific evidence, but it's my gastroenterologist. She had such embarrassing eczema all over her hands that she said, it was so embarrassing being a doctor because I used my hands all the time, my hands on my face. And she was vegetarian for years and ditched dairy, completely gone, has never come back. It's right. It's just the inflammation that it causes, which then exacerbates, the list of situations that I've just described. So if people want to give it a try, I mean, I think it's fun to just say, okay, let me just try it for, 7 to 14 days. Like, cause do an experiment. Like you want to notice the difference. And I don't mind if people want to do it slowly, like take out one dairy product at a time. But if you really want to be like, this is the best I've ever felt, drop it all, because it's astounding. So if you want to do it all, if you want to do it like 7 or 14 days or something, we have a ton of ideas on the site of what to change out with, because people are so used to having dairy foods in their diet that they oftentimes want a replacement. Now, as you go along, I've found that like, I don't need the replacements anymore. It's like, I don't have to exactly replace yogurt. I don't have to exactly replace cheese. You know what I mean? Just eat other foods. And but people do in the beginning. I get that. So I think that the most delicious yogurts and ice cream are coconut based, but you can also get almond based or oat based, right? Those are delicious too. So if you have, which are a little like snack in the night, or a lot of people love yogurt in the morning, soy-based yogurt, coconut-based yogurt, almond-based yogurt. There's so many different brands. There's so many out there. And even the cheese category is wildly improving over even just the last 3 years, right? There's just so many artisanal vegan cheesemakers that are doing really similar things in aging cheeses and smoking cheeses, just like you can with Jerry cheese, but it's made from mostly cashews. I mean, I think those are probably, we could all agree, the tastiest, right? Because there's a bit of fat in cashews. So it has that a little bit more of the same consistency as dairy cheese. So just kind of go find your favorites. And here's a mistake I find that people make all the time. They go to the grocery store and they're like, okay, I'm going to switch this out. And they get a couple different products, whatever it might be, the soy yogurt, right? And they don't like it. And then they quit. And I always say, it's just like the animal-based stuff. Like there's brands you don't like. And so you don't buy it. So you've got to find, because there's so many out there. Just go back, buy something different, have a new experience, because there's going to be something out there for you. It might take a little trial and error, right? And that's okay. So just give it a little bit of time and find the swap outs. But for a lot of times I think people get hung up on baking too, because they want to be able to use the eggs and the butter. An incredible replacement that's also healthy, and I swear it does the exact same thing in cakes or brownies or whatever it is 2 tablespoons of water and 1 tablespoon of flaxseed meal, not flax seeds, but ground up flaxseed meal. And you whisk that together, and that's 1 egg for baking. Mind blowing. I mean, it literally behaves like 1 egg, and you can't taste the difference at all. So that's like a little fun trick too for the bakers out there.
And then you'll be getting the healthy omega-3s, reducing the saturated fat. It's win-win.
It is.
I think we should get Dotsie to contribute a recipe to our Planet Cuisine campaign.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I mean, exactly right. The alternative market is exponentially improving. Well, in this part of the world, we grow our own oats, and oat milk is a massively growing market here in New Zealand, especially.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of alternatives, like you say, a lot of artisanal sort of type yogurts, cheeses, and so on. It's in Australia, it's in New Zealand, it's everywhere, and it's certainly great for that transitioning period. If you're looking purely from a health perspective, okay, maybe not all the time, but it's great as assisting that, and I think that's hugely important. Emma mentioned wonderful website that you have, lots of resources, but something you have on top of the resources, just like we do, you have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast that you co-host as well.
Yes, right. We're all co-hosts. I co-host it alongside Alexandra Paul, who's a lifelong animal activist, fierce as all hell. Also been an actress for over 30 years. She was one of the Baywatch stars back in the day, and she is the activist that I just have the most respect for. They're all incredible, but she's like the activist that's been arrested 16 or 17 times. Like she gets real. I mean, she goes and busts up things that are happening in factory farms. She does undercover investigations. I mean, she's just, you couldn't imagine, like in the middle of the night, Alexandra sneaking around a dairy farm, taking pictures of the baby veal calves in the little huts all by themselves, chained up by their neck. Oh, that's what she does. And she'll just come on the podcast the next day like nothing happened the night before. And she can't usually tell me right away. Like she'll tell me a couple weeks later because she's like, no one can know where she's been or what she's done. But she's the real deal. But we started the podcast about 3 years ago. We're just about to come up on episode 200. And we talk about probably a lot of the things that y'all talk about. But we have a great time. And yeah. If anybody ever wants to just listen to one episode, because mostly you listen to the lentil intervention, I get it. Tune in and join us, and that'd be fun.
The rule is, once you've listened to our episode, then you can listen to other podcasts. So there we go.
Okay.
We'll put you number 2 on the list.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough.
Well, firstly, sorry, Emma, but I have to say, when are you coming to visit New Zealand next? Because, you certainly have a lot
Australia has better weather. Come over here.
True. But, Dotsie, you have a massive affinity for this part of the world. Let's just make it a general comment. You need to bring your... I don't think we have ever ignited so much passion like we have out of a guest. We're talking about your personal story. That's great. But as soon as we mention Switch4Good, as soon as we mention what you're all about, wow, did we light a fire? And it's brilliant because we need passionate people, and not just passion, but passion with knowledge. You actually know your stuff. We talk a lot about this with a lot of our scientists and academics that we interview, the knowledge of communicating science, but certainly your way of communicating and coming across, but factual and in a way that's still engaging. That's we don't have enough of you. So it's really amazing,
that's so kind.
The work that you do, and hope that you continue to do. But yeah, look, I think, we got to say a big thank you because, like we said, different time zones, you've got a super busy schedule, little behind the scenes. We actually had the schedule before, we had to move it. It's incredibly, we know everyone's incredibly busy, and for good reason. So thank you so much for giving up some valuable time in your calendar and coming and sharing your passion, the story, the excitement, because I think there is a bright future ahead of us if we all collectively move forward in that direction. But thank you so much,
I think so
Dotsie,
too.
for coming on.
Are you anywhere near Hawke's Bay?
No, I'm in Auckland. So,
okay,
5.5 hour drive.
5. Okay. The president of our board of directors of Switch4Good lives in Hawke's Bay. She's LA born and bred, but she met a Kiwi and married. And so I am coming to visit sometime in the next probably 6 months. So I'll fly into Auckland though, right? So we can hang out and then I'll go down and be with her.
That'll be amazing.
Can't wait.
But thank you so much for coming onto the show, Dotsie. We really appreciate this.
Thank you so much too.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.